You all helped us surpass 70,000 subscribers. If you look in the description below, click the link to the giveaway on Gleam, and if you're subscribed, hit that button. This is to ensure we don't accidentally give the Switch to an inactive subscriber. But with that, we have another giveaway. That's right, another. If we reach 85,000 subscribers by the launch of the Switch and Zelda on March 3rd, we'll be giving away this 10-inch Link statue by first 4 figures. Now then, onto the video. Does The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild have real traditional dungeons? Or will we have to do with the 100 plus Sheikah shrines? Of course it has dungeons, and thanks to Game Informer, we even got interiors and the boss of one of them spoiled for us. So before we move on, here's a little info.
The first section contains no spoilers. The second contains spoilers if you haven't watched Commonwealth Realms' Story of the Past episode, or the backstory videos by Zeltic or me. The third and final section is heavy Game Informer dungeon and boss spoiler territory. So with that being said, let's enter inside the shrines and dungeons of Breath of the Wild.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of Inside The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. In this video, we will go deep into the shrines and dungeons of Hyrule, so without further ado, let's get started. The Sheikah Shrines. We begin our adventure and obtain the Sheikah Slate in the Resurrection Shrine, then use said item to activate the Sheikah Towers of Hyrule, and with the map of these, unlock entrances to the shrines of a given province. Sounds familiar. Moving on. Finishing the Shrines of the Great Plateau is mandatory in order to get off the introductory area, and if you decide that you are too cool for that shit, then you're in for a sudden death. In other words, all of us have to receive the 4 physics runes of Magnesis, Cryonis, Remote Bombs, and Stasis, and obtain the 4 spirit orbs from all of the elderly Sheikah monks found in the shrines of Oman, Au, Jabaij, Kinumut, and Oa Daim. Kind of contradicts the statement that you'll be able to go to the final boss at the very beginning of the game. It is first then that the old man, who reminds us of a certain someone, hands over the paraglider and frees us from the confines of the tiny plateau, sending us out into the ruins of Hyrule. So upon grabbing and registering your horse at the nearby stable, it is time to move on to the next 100 plus Sheikah shrines of trials for treasure, new runes, and further upgrades.
Unlike dungeons and mini-dungeons of the past, Sheikah Shrines of Trials in Breath of the Wild share more or less an identical interior design, but have different elemental and physical themes and puzzles attached to them. For instance, the Bosch Kala Shrine near the Great Plateau, also known as the shrine where the wind guides you. Needless to say, the newly acquired paraglider is essential to finish the trial and shrine. It speaks for itself that the shrines will require specific runes or items in order to be solved. For instance, the Rota-On Shrine requires hitting switches to, for instance, launching Link up to higher levels of the shrine and closer to its Sheikah monk. As you reach new areas, more and more shrines will appear, but with varying degrees of difficulty when it comes to its puzzles and enemies.
During the E3 Treehouse playthrough, 2 more complicated shrines, Kam Yatak and Komyuog, were showcased, and we have been further informed that the different shrines outside of the plateau will have varying lengths, and some of them might even have bosses blocking our path to the Sheikah monks. Another thing that we will likely use the Shrines of Trial for is to further upgrade existing runes from the Great Plateau and many other runes. In fact, in the comments below our recent direct capture video, YouTube user FUKI pointed out to us that there could be 24 or more slots for additional Sheikah runes, and that the text above this part says runes and damaged data. Furthermore, YouTube user Jay Botchter pointed out that there is an album and Hyrule Compendium section within the slate. Could it be that Link or Zelda used some of these runes in the past? And speaking of the past, in the tapestry found in the Master and Special editions of Breath of the Wild in the US, Canada, Japan, and Australia, the backstory of Breath of the Wild is told, and thanks to Zeltic and his Discord helpers, we know that it goes like this.
Hylians pass stories of a destined time long past, where multiple races lived and worked together in harmony. The Sheikah tribe's blue aura breathed through the land, and this mutual prosperity continued until a cataclysmic disaster struck. The hero and the princess attempted in vain to seal the terror, which became known as the Calamity Ganon. Divine beasts woke from 4 directions and deployed a mechanical army, which made the king and his people fearful. They fractured Ganon's power and sealed him, but the Sheikah were banished from the land ever since.
In other words, the divine beasts from the 4 corners of the land were unleashed by the Sheikah to ambush Calamity Ganon, but were ultimately corrupted by his malice and taken over. The 4 beasts told in the tapestry are the mechanical bird from the mountains in the northwest, the mechanical chameleon at the summit of Death Mountain in the northeast, the mechanical camel deep in the southwest of the Gerudo Desert, and a mechanical elephant somewhere near Hyrule's southeastern coast. Together they can make up some, if not all, of the main dungeons found in the 4 main edges of the game's map, which brings us over to the 3rd and spoiler-heavy Game Informer dungeon section. This is your final warning. If you don't want to be spoiled of the interiors and boss types of the dungeons in Breath of the Wild, stop watching this video now, as this section contains some heavy spoilers from the first dungeon and information of how dungeons will work in the game.
But first, make sure to check out our Discord server. Link is on the screen and the description below.
Ready for spoilers? Let's go. To begin with, let's just say that the dungeons found inside Breath of the Wild are not like traditional dungeons that we're used to in the Zelda series. The dungeons will, to a large extent, share the same interior design and be mechanized. The puzzles will no longer be focused around one key dungeon item, and there is no dungeon compass. The need for these changes has been explained by series producer Eiji Aonuma in the following way. Quote, "Dungeons have always been like mazes, so we needed that compass to let the user know where the bosses were placed. But in Breath of the Wild, you kind of see the goal right away. You won't get lost, you just have to figure out how to get there." This brings us over to the second point. The dungeons are smaller and have less of a labyrinth structure to them compared to games such as Skyward Sword or Twilight Princess. Does this mean there will be no key locks blocking your path, or dungeon items which will help you progress in the dungeon? Most likely yes, as we will be much more dependent on other elements found in the game, since the dungeons and their interiors will be constantly moving, probably because they are divine beasts.
That's right, and it mostly comes down to the Sheikah Slate, runes, and the paraglider, which you obtain upon departing from the Great Plateau. You see, the Sheikah Slate doesn't just serve as your map to Hyrule, it's also used as a 3D model map and binoculars within dungeons of the game. Key points and locations in the dungeon will be marked, but otherwise you have one giant puzzle to solve. The first dungeon only has 1 floor, but key objective and points are naturally unreachable to begin with. In other words, it appears that Breath of the Wild will, to some extent, throw out the well-known formula of floor-by-floor dungeons, with 1-floored ones just like in the original Legend of Zelda, and this makes tons of sense, as Breath of the Wild seems to draw a great inspiration from the first adventure in the series. However, does this mean that the dungeons will have much harder puzzles than in other 3D Zelda games? It's still too early to tell, but according to Game Informer, there will be an allied voice guiding us through this constantly changing dungeon, aiding with general hints and warning us of the dungeon boss. And these might be needed, as we will, to some degree, be capable of manipulating and tilting the dungeon's mechanism and structure itself through the Sheikah Slate, as a result turning the dungeon into one giant mechanical puzzle, like a Rubik's Cube, where blocks can be moved and it could create angles where we could fly through with our paraglider to progress deeper into the dungeon.
This means that, in addition to traditional puzzles such as crystal switches, we also need to keep in mind that the dungeon itself is a puzzle, to a much greater extent than the great twist to the Stone Tower Temple in Majora's Mask. So we got traditional Zelda puzzles, physics puzzles, and a giant dungeon puzzle to solve. What else? How about corrupted malice on the floors and walls, which hurts Link like a radioactive substance would in real life? And on top of that, probably spawn more enemies. Now we begin to talk about complexity in the dungeons. Luckily, finding and destroying the eyeball of each malice pocket can erase them. So, you've tilted the dungeon from one end to another, destroyed the malice substance covering the walls and floors, and glide through an opening to the dungeon's exterior. What awaits you? A giant enemy crab! No, just kidding. It's Wind Blight Ganon. And you know it's Ganon, just look at the fur. According to the friendly voice, the boss is one of Ganon's own. It plays dirty, And with good reason, as this boss is gigantic, has no face, but a giant laser or beam gun that will put any Sheikah Guardian to shame. With tornadoes and large fire spikes, this monster has no dungeon item weak points, and will crush you if you don't properly prepare for the dungeons found in the game. Get ready for the battle of your life.
But will these 4 beasts be the only dungeons in the game? Probably not, as these divine beasts are smaller than traditional dungeons. Most likely we will see some other dungeons inside Breath of the Wild. And on that bombshell, we just want to say that a little more than 2 weeks separates us from the launch of the game we have been talking about since December 2014. So as a special final episode of this first season of Inside Breath of the Wild, you will hear why we wholeheartedly believe that this will not only be the best Zelda game, but more specifically, the best game of all time. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to help us reach 85k subscribers by the launch of Breath of the Wild for that sweet, sweet Zelda giveaway, and remember to enter our Nintendo Switch giveaway. Also make sure to subscribe to HMK for your daily Zelda fix and his 100k Nintendo Switch giveaway. Until then, this was the Commonwealth Realm with HMK, and we will see you girls and guys later.